Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I just got back from El Salvador, where I went to advocate for due process for Kilmar Abrego Garcia, André Hernandez Romero, and hundreds of others who have been illegally abducted and deported by Donald Trump. Mr. Abrego Garcia is a husband, a father, a union sheet metal worker who was here with legal status. I cannot even begin to imagine the pain and fear that his family and loved ones have felt during this time. While there, I was able to speak with his wife, Jennifer, who shared her concerns for Kilmar's health and well-being. His family wants to make sure that he's okay, and they want to know what we are doing to bring him home. We also met with Mr. Abrego Garcia's lawyer, who was traveling with us, gave us context about what is going on and what the next steps are. With his guidance and support, I, along with Representatives Garcia, Frost, and Dexter, wrote a letter to Secretary of State Marco Rubio outlining 3 key things that we need to see moving forward. Regular, verifiable proof of life from Kilmar that can be shared with his family, guaranteed access to counsel, and the immediate facilitation of his return by the United States government. We also had the opportunity to meet with U.S. Embassy officials to express our concerns about the treatment of Kilmar, André, and the hundreds of others who have been illegally imprisoned in El Salvador. This morning, I was so glad to hear that as a result of our meeting and our advocacy, for the first time, the embassy has raised questions directly to President Nayib Bukele's administration about the treatment of more than 250 Venezuelan migrants now being held in Salvadoran custody. What that means is that our advocacy is working. Fighting for due process, freedoms, and our constitutional rights is working, and we will not stop now. But we also have to recognize that this is about more than just one man. It's about all of us. What we're witnessing is a constitutional crisis. Donald Trump and his administration are waging a full-out war on our rights and freedoms. Not only is he violating the rights of Americans, he's defying the Supreme Court, which voted unanimously and ruled unanimously to stop this cruel and discriminatory deportation and to secure the release of the people who have been wrongly deported. And he said that he wants to do this to homegrowns next. That means that Donald Trump is ready and willing to ignore the courts, ignore Congress, and use taxpayer dollars to deport American citizens. That means that what happened to Kilmar can happen to all of us. I held a Know Your Rights town hall in January where over 14,000 of our community members showed up to learn what their rights are if they were to encounter ICE. But now so many people are afraid and asking, what if our rights mean nothing? Just last weekend, I hosted a town hall here in Phoenix, and I had a mom come up to me terrified because her son is Salvadoran. She said they are scared to travel as a family this summer because she's worried that her child will be deported, just like Kilmar. And just last week, a U.S. citizen was wrongly detained by ICE here in Arizona, in Nogales, a U.S. citizen. Phoenix is also home to thousands of asylum seekers, including Afghan refugees who are receiving cryptic communications telling them to leave and go back to countries where they would face immediate harm and death. Over 100 international students at the Arizona State University had their student visas revoked without explanation and facing deportation. An Iraq veteran in Levine, who served 2 tours, was detained by ICE agents while running errands despite having a green card. These are our neighbors, our classmates, friends, and loved ones. These are people who have made our community into the vibrant, diverse city that we know and love. Donald Trump wants this story to die. He wants us to forget about Kilmar and André and the Venezuelan migrants being held illegally because then he can continue to get away with it. But we can't let him. It is against the Constitution and it defies what we hold so dear in our country, which is due process and the rule of law. If that's allowed to fly, Donald Trump will be emboldened and he will not only continue his illegal tirade against legal residents, he'll escalate it. That's why I went to El Salvador, to keep the pressure on for Kilmar, for our community here in Phoenix, and for all of us. And it's a story that resonates with me personally. My parents fled an authoritarian regime where people were disappeared, just like what we're seeing happen today in the United States. I will not sit back and stand by and allow it to continue. I'm so proud to represent a diverse immigrant community here in Arizona's 3rd District, and I will always fight for all of us and our fundamental right to due process so that we are all safe. Now I'll turn it over to Caitlin, who will take some questions for us. Thank you.
Congresswoman.
Hey
Dennis
everyone.
Wells, CBS 5 News.
Sorry, Dennis. We're just going to call on folks individually. Just give me 1 sec. Just who's here. Let's start with Morgan, actually. Phoenix News Times.
I wanted to know if you had any contact with the State Department as a result of your letter. Have you heard from Secretary Rubio about his response to your letter or what the next steps are?
So the letter was sent immediately after our meeting with the U.S. Ambassador yesterday in El Salvador at approximately 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We have not yet heard back. We'll continue to push. We did receive confirmation that the letter was received, but we have not had an official response yet.
Okay, great. Let's go around this way. Let's go to KTAR.
Hi, it's Alan, KTAR News. Can you just talk about the process you went through to try to meet Kilmar Abrego and what happened when that request was made?
Absolutely. So I'll start at the beginning. So the official process began when 2 of my colleagues on the House Oversight Committee, a committee which I serve on as well, wrote a letter to the chairman of the Oversight Committee, which is Mr. Comer. He is from Kentucky. We requested this so that we could go on an official congressional delegation, which Republicans have been able to go on to go visit CCOT and go to El Salvador. Unfortunately, that request was denied. We're extremely committed to this issue, so we decided to go on our own. We personally funded these trips. We went to El Salvador. In advance of the trip, we wrote a letter to the U.S. Embassy so that they could ask on our behalf, requests with the Salvadoran government that we could sit down and meet with Mr. Abrego Garcia to confirm proof of life again. This is important because as a result of our conversations with his lawyer, he made clear that even though last week Senator Van Hollen was able to confirm proof of life, that is something that they need regularly. They're very concerned about continued backlash for this individual, especially in light of all of the attention it's receiving in the United States and around the world. So our request was to again sit with Mr. Garcia. When we arrived at our meeting with the U.S. Ambassador, we were immediately told that the local government had denied our request, and that's when we escalated that request to the Secretary of State.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, for your patience. Let's go to KJCZ.
Yeah, Kirsten Norman with KJCZ. You mentioned that what happened to Mr. Garcia could happen to anyone, and in fact, you raised concerns about another individual called CCOT. How can you reassure families here that their rights are protected, and just how serious, to give listeners an idea and an understanding, are the human rights risks that you're seeing?
Frankly speaking, I cannot assure families here that their rights will not be messed with or denied by this government. That is why I feel so compelled to escalate this issue and to not let this story die. From the get-go, Donald Trump and his administration admitted that this was an administrative error. You would think that after that happened, they would correct their mistake and return Mr. Garcia home, but that's not what they did. So this situation escalated to the Supreme Court, and even after a 9-0 Supreme Court decision, the highest court in the land, of course, still the president refuses. And now you see a complete fear-mongering campaign and a complete change of story in regard to this individual. So that is why I think this is so important. I think families in Phoenix, especially immigrant families, should be able to know that if they were to be accused of something, that they would be able to have due process and see a day in court. And that applies to every American. Every single one of us under this administration should have access, under any circumstance, should have access to due process. And that's what makes this country unique. Otherwise, we're no different than any other authoritarian dictatorship in the world. So I will not let this go. I will continue to demand justice and demand that the administration simply follow the law and simply follow the Supreme Court's decision.
Okay, great. Yeah. Let's go back to Cameron at Courier and then up to Caitlin.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. Let's do Cameron, then Caitlin.
Yeah, Cameron Top Courier. Were you able to learn anything new about Kilmar's situation, about anyone who's being detained in the Senate of the United States, or about our contract with El Salvador to house people?
I would say what we learned is in a couple of steps. So we met with a number of human rights groups on the ground who really talked through the context of what is happening in El Salvador and how over the last 3 years, what people in El Salvador have been going through. They have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Many men are imprisoned, even some falsely charged and imprisoned. What they emphasize to us, these human rights groups, is that Donald Trump is following the same authoritarian playbook as Bukele in terms of lack of due process, consolidating power, really refusing to listen to the Supreme Court or any other court of law. We also, while we had a classified briefing with the U.S. ambassador, I can say that from everything that we heard, it is clear that this administration has not asked for Kilmar Garcia to be released or to facilitate his release, and that is extremely concerning. We also were not able to verify exactly where Mr. Garcia is. There's no answers there either. And we also decided, again, as I've mentioned, this is not just about Mr. Garcia. There's other cases that are deeply concerning. 19-year-old Ansari Hernandez Romero, he was a gay artist trying to come to the United States legally through our CBP-1 process. Because of some of the tattoos that he had, they just said he's a gang member and also deported him to El Salvador. And nobody has heard from him since March 14th. We spoke with his lawyers, and we've subsequently written a letter to the U.S. government asking for information about him as well. So there are a number of cases here, and I think the most important thing to remember is that this administration continues to defy the Supreme Court of the United States.
Let's go to Caitlin Cronkite.
Caitlin Humphrey, Cronkite News. Do you have any plans to meet with the Republican Party, especially in response to the article that came out just earlier?
I definitely intend to continue to speak with Republican colleagues about this issue. I continue to find it very concerning that Republicans have always been the party of rule of law, supporting the Constitution. I thought it was very interesting and compelling that even Joe Rogan the other day on his podcast sounded the alarm about this, because it is very clear if we don't have due process, we have nothing. Due process is what provides rights to Americans in this country. So I will continue to try to work with Republican colleagues about this because it is an issue that, to me, transcends partisan politics. It should impact all of us because it's about the future of our institution and our democracy.
Great, yeah, name and outlet, and then if we can talk in the middle of the mics here. Yes.
Jeremy Boyd, Arizona Mirror. As you mentioned, the administration is ignoring the Supreme Court ruling. El Salvador government wasn't going to give you access. You said you sent a letter to the Secretary of State. Secretary of State Mark Rubio is a Trump loyalist. I mean, what are you and other leaders planning to do other than sending letters to make action against the administration and another government that is actively not really wanting to cooperate at all?
Well, I think traveling for 36 hours and showing up in the country where this is taking place was a pretty significant step that we took with significant risks, with sans security, sans any sort of official protection whatsoever. So I think that was a pretty significant step. The letters that we wrote were a result of new information that we learned through the classified briefing that we had. We got some answers that made clear what has or hasn't happened in regard to the Donald Trump administration asking and making a formal request to President Bukele for Mr. Garcia's return. That's where the letter stemmed from. I know that we, were the second ones to go. Senator Van Hollen was the first. I believe that we will not be the last. There are other members of Congress and senators who are planning to go to El Salvador to continue drawing attention to this crisis. And I think that's what we need to do. We are living in an environment where the administration is trying to flood the zone. They are putting out, tens, dozens, sometimes hundreds of new executive orders out regularly and distracting us, quite frankly, and this is an issue that we should not and cannot let slide given the impacts that it could potentially have for American citizens in this country.
Okay, great. Let's go to Univision next.
Can you just briefly tell us a little more on that conversation that you had with family?
Absolutely. So we were with the lawyer for the family who has been representing the family since the beginning of this case. We were able to FaceTime with them from El Salvador. They did put out a statement expressing their gratitude to the 4 members who were there to advocate on behalf of Mr. Garcia. They mentioned to us the concerns they had around his health. Without going into details that might invade their privacy, Mr. Garcia has significant health issues, and they're concerned that in these prisons, he's probably not getting the health care that he needs. They also were concerned that they had not had any confirmation that he is alive since last week, which is also concerning given the circumstances around his case. They thanked us for the continued advocacy, mentioned the union that he is a part of, the sheet metal workers. The president of the building trades actually spoke out about this very publicly just last week about the fact that this is a union member who has been helping to build this country and that he should be returned. And we promised them that we will not give up and that he, like every other person who's in the United States, deserves due process.
All right, Laura.
Human rights groups obviously point to President Bukele in El Salvador as a cautionary tale, throwing hundreds of people into prison at once. But of course, in his country, he enjoys pretty high approval ratings. What do you make of that?
So we learned a lot about that as well. Of course, you know, El Salvador has had a history of gang violence, and Mr. Bukele, they explained, definitely has a high approval rating because he has been able to make the country safer. They also did talk to us about a real culture of fear in the country and the fact that despite the safety, many are very afraid to talk about politics, to talk about any sort of rights whatsoever. Interestingly enough, they told us about recent polling in the country because we were asking about what the sentiment was in regard to foreigners like Americans being brought to El Salvador in the prisons. And they referenced polling, I have not seen it yet, but they referenced polling that was just done that the majority of Salvadorans do not approve of foreign individuals coming and being brought to their prisons inside the country. So I think that is very important to note. And here in the United States, the polling is very similar. The majority of Americans believe that Mr. Garcia should be returned and that Donald Trump should follow the Supreme Court's decision.
Okay, Dennis.
So, Congressman, 36 hours, obviously you've had time to think about what you want to do next. What are you going to do? What would you like to see Democrats do next from here? Because it seems at this point the administration is digging in and they are not going to facilitate Mr. Garcia's return. So tell us about what you want to see happen next with your own party and what you are planning to do next.
So immediately upon return, which was last night, I returned back to the United States. This morning, have been in touch with some of my Democratic colleagues in the House, just filling them in on the trip, what happened, what we learned, similar to the information we are letting you all know today. As I mentioned, dozens of members are interested in going to El Salvador as well. I think what is particularly important and not talked about as much is the fact that we as a government are paying $20,000 per prisoner of U.S. taxpayer money to send people over to CICOT and other prisons in El Salvador. There are plans to grow the prison exponentially. Some have said by 4 times the current size. And so we need to put the pressure on Republicans to ensure that we can also go see the prison. We were denied access. There are many Republican members who have been able to go see the prison. And if we're talking about sending Americans to El Salvador to be in prison, then this should not be a partisan issue. This should not be something that only Republicans are allowed to go see the prison. Democrats should also be allowed. So we're going to keep the pressure on in that regard. I intend to talk to Mr. Comer when I return and really understand better why our official request was not approved. But this is just the beginning. And again, I think it's really important now to speak with more conservative audiences about this issue of due process and our Constitution. Later today, I'll be speaking on Fox News about it, because I have found that for my constituents, it's both Democrats and Republicans who find this concerning. Because again, if this can happen to someone under this administration, to be just sent abroad, abducted without any due process whatsoever, no day in court, right? Then that kind of accusation could happen to every American.
So it seems like since Democrats don't have any power in Congress, basically you're speaking to the media,
claim your property at the level 3 east.
And take direct action like we just did. I mean, when we did not get the official approval, we decided to just go ourselves and pay the expenses to go to El Salvador and get the answers that we need.
Okay, great. Let's go to the back to Telemundo.
Just a quick question. What can the Hispanic community do if they're arrested fairly? Can they contact your office? What can they do?
Absolutely. My office is a safe space for everyone. We are here to serve our community and our district. We have a website, ansari.house.gov. You can find our phone number for both our Washington, D.C. office, and we have an office right here in Phoenix. We have bilingual caseworkers who can support you, experts on immigration who have worked in the U.S. government before, and we will do everything that we can to help. That's why we've been working with local immigration attorneys to host Know Your Rights sessions. We've been hosting resource fairs and have Know Your Rights pamphlets translated into the top 5 languages spoken in this district, going around to local businesses and getting that done. So we want to make sure that everyone continues to have rights as put forward by the United States Constitution.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's go to Rick at CBS.
You've done several town halls. How much of what you've heard from people that have come to listen to you speak factored into going to El Salvador?
Great question. A significant amount. These last 2 weeks, I would say that this issue was the #1 issue that my office heard about. Second to that being Trump's reckless tariff policies that have really devastated people economically in my district. And again, I serve a district that is extremely diverse, and people feel extremely fearful. People feel a lot of fear about this administration. And so I felt extremely compelled to make sure that we raise the alarm about this case and the fact that it could happen to anyone if the administration continues to be emboldened. And I really want to draw attention to the comments that President Trump made in the Oval Office with President Bukele when he was caught on the hot mic saying, "Homegrowns will be next." Homegrowns is referring to U.S. citizens. So the fact that our own president is speaking in that way, and he's getting a nod of approval from the president of El Salvador should scare everyone in this country.
I think that's all we have. One final?
Corey wants to return to claim your property at the level 3 east information center.
How hopeful are you that this case can be resolved, or do you see it just getting worse as time goes?
You know, I want to be hopeful. I truly want to be hopeful that this administration will do the right thing. I don't see why they wouldn't. They have full, backing with the Supreme Court's 9-0 decision, which includes several very conservative judges who were appointed by Donald Trump himself. So if the president really wanted to, he could make a phone call today and ask President Bukele of El Salvador to release Kilmar Garcia back to the United States and ensure that this doesn't happen again. They have the legal authority to enact the immigration policies that they want, but they need to do so according to the laws of the United States.
All right, everyone, it's 1, so unless I missed anyone, we're going to let the Congresswoman go to her next engagement. Thank you guys so much for joining us. If you have any questions,